Imagine a single tree quietly feeding a family for 70 years. No plowing, no chemicals, no yearly struggle. It was once the foundation of food security for entire societies, until it was deliberately erased, not because it failed, but because too much independence was a threat. What could make abundance so dangerous that it had to disappear? Thousands of years ago, voyagers set out across the Pacific, carrying more than just hope in their canoes. They brought with them cuttings and root suckers of breadfruit, a tree they had learned to trust. On each new island, they planted these living staples not as scattered individuals, but in groves close to their villages. Food security was not measured in sacks or silos, but in the number and health of trees growing within reach of every home. A single breadfruit tree, once established, could yield up to 200 fruits in a good year. Each fruit, heavy with starch and fiber, was enough to feed a person for a day or more. Families planted several trees together, often along the edges of their homes and communal spaces, creating a living barrier of abundance. In these groves, breadfruit shared space with coconuts, bananas, taro, and medicinal plants, forming layered systems that mimicked the structure of forests. The placement of each tree was deliberate, close enough for daily care and harvest, yet spaced to allow sunlight and airflow, and to make room for other crops below. Through generations, these groves became more than food sources. They marked property, traced kinship, and anchored stories of origin. Some breadfruit trees still fruiting today were planted by ancestors 5 generations back. The act of planting was a promise, a tree for children not yet born, a meal for a future that could not be seen, but was always planned for. A mature breadfruit tree stands as both a record and a promise. Once it begins to bear, often within 6 years of planting, it can yield up to 200 fruits per year, each weighing between 1 and 3 kilograms. That means a single tree can supply anywhere from 1,500 to 3,000 calories per fruit. For a family, just a handful of trees can bridge the gap between hunger and sufficiency year after year. In villages across the Pacific, elders recall trees that have fed their lineage for as long as anyone can remember. Some are still producing after 70 years. These living archives are more than scenery. They are the backbone of household math. Counting trees is counting meals, not just for today, but for children and grandchildren yet to come. The rules of tenure are written in memory as much as in law. In Samoa and Tonga, breadfruit trees planted near the family home typically belong to the father's lineage, passed from father to son. In parts of Fiji and Micronesia, the story runs through mothers and daughters, with groves inherited by women across generations. Who plants and who harvests is not just a matter of custom, but of survival. Women often control the processing and sharing of the harvest, while men tend and climb the trees. These patterns of control and inheritance are not trivial details. They decide who eats, who teaches, and who remembers. Some trees today still bear fruit for the 5th or even 6th generation of a single family. In every case, the tree stands as proof. Abundance was never accidental, and food security was rooted in the structure of society itself. Colonial officials arrived with a different vision for land and labor. In the eyes of British administrators and plantation managers, groves of breadfruit and coconut were obstacles, not assets. Trees that fed families for generations stood in the way of a new order, one where every acre was measured by export value, and every worker by the hours they could be kept in the fields. Directives from London and local colonial offices rewarded landholders who cleared mixed groves to make way for sugarcane, rice, and wheat. These annual crops demanded plowing, planting, and harvesting on a fixed schedule, creating a need for constant labor and supervision. The old system, where a tree planted by an ancestor could feed a household for decades, was gradually sidelined by policies that favored crops needing yearly attention and outside inputs. Missionaries joined the campaign for change, preaching not just new faiths, but new tastes. Church schools and mission gardens promoted bread, tea, and imported flour, while describing breadfruit and other local staples as backward or insufficient. In schoolrooms and sermons, children learned that civilization meant eating wheat, not breadfruit, that progress meant trading the shade of groves for the order of fields. Plantation manuals and agricultural bulletins from the 19th century praised the virtues of cleared land and disciplined labor, offering incentives for those who adopted modern crops and methods. In practice, this meant that the best soils were reserved for sugarcane and other exports, while breadfruit and other perennials were pushed to the margins, both physically and culturally. The result was a landscape transformed by policy as much as by plow. Export crop rewards and the engineering of new tastes worked hand in hand to undermine the independence that breadfruit once offered. Where food security had once grown on trees, dependence now grew in the fields. In 1787, the British Admiralty commissioned a single-masted ship for a task unlike any before it. The HMS Bounty was stripped of its guns and rebuilt to carry a living cargo, more than 1,000 breadfruit saplings, each potted and stacked along the decks. The mission was clear in the letters of Sir Joseph Banks. Breadfruit observed thriving in Tahiti was to become the new staple for enslaved workers in the Caribbean. The planters wanted a food that required little labor and less expense. The Crown wanted to quiet famine scandals and cut costs. For nearly half a year, the Bounty's crew lingered in Tahiti, collecting and tending the trees. Every day, men watched as their water rations were diverted to keep the breadfruit alive, even as their own needs went unmet. The trees, destined for plantations across the ocean, became a symbol of everything that separated the officers' ambitions from the sailors' daily reality. Resentment grew in the cramped, humid quarters. Bligh, the captain, enforced naval discipline with a hard edge, reserving his sharpest words for those he saw as slackers or insubordinate. On April 28, 1789, the tensions snapped. Fletcher Christian and his followers seized the ship, set Bligh and his loyalists adrift, and cast most of the breadfruit plants overboard. The mutiny became legend. The experiment, at least for that voyage, failed, but the logic behind it, feeding the enslaved as cheaply as possible using the fruits of another people's independence, did not die with the Bounty. Within 2 years, Bligh returned on the HMS Providence, delivering breadfruit to St. Vincent and Jamaica. Today, genetic studies confirm that many Caribbean breadfruit trees still bear the DNA of those first saplings. The same trees, once symbols of freedom and sufficiency, were repurposed to fuel a system built on captivity. The irony is plain. A tree carried across oceans to sustain bondage, rooted in the name of abundance. Breadfruit spreads by cuttings and root suckers, not by seed. Anyone with a single tree can multiply it for free, passing saplings from neighbor to neighbor. This is a problem for companies built on selling seeds and chemicals year after year. The modern agribusiness model depends on crops that must be bought again each season. Hybrids that don't breed true, seeds protected by patents, and fields that require fertilizer and pesticide contracts all enforce dependence. Breadfruit's biology resists this cycle. Once a community has access, it can keep propagating trees for generations, with no need for outside purchase or permission. Independence. Breadfruit's numbers are hard to ignore. In well-managed tropical groves, a single hectare can yield over 10 million calories each year, often more food energy than rice or wheat in similar climates. These trees endure drought, storms, and poor soil, producing for decades with little need for fertilizer or pesticides. Fresh breadfruit spoils quickly, but Pacific communities solved that centuries ago by fermenting the pulp underground and storing it for months or even years. Modern drying and milling methods now extend shelf life even further, turning breadfruit into flour or chips. When pests threaten, integrated pest management, including pruning, sanitation, and encouraging natural predators, keeps losses low without routine chemicals. The world's largest breadfruit germplasm bank preserves more than 100 cultivars, ensuring resilience against disease and climate shifts. The Food and Agriculture Organization now lists breadfruit among the most promising crops for future food security. Breadfruit is not the only crop to face this quiet sidelining. Amaranth once fed entire civilizations in Central America, prized for its nutrition and resilience, then pushed aside after colonization. Fonio, a tiny grain from West Africa, thrived in poor soils and drought, yet lost ground to imported rice. Jerusalem artichoke, a perennial tuber native to North America, could survive harsh winters but faded from fields as potatoes and corn took over. Skirret, a sweet root grown for centuries in Europe, was nearly forgotten when annual staples became the norm. Each of these crops offered independence and stability, yet all were swept to the margins, not by accident, but by the design of systems that reward control over continuity. A single breadfruit tree can outlast governments and feed generations. No patents, no dependence, just abundance. As food insecurity rises and climate extremes worsen, the crops we ignore today may define our survival tomorrow. Some roots run too deep to erase. What will we choose to remember?